In this video, I want to show you how I create my Helix patches. I want to show you the process and my general setup. I will show you the signal chain, what kind of effects and amps I use and why, and how I use them. And you will also get a bit of insight in how I record my covers. So with that being said, a very warm welcome back to the channel. A while ago, I actually made a video about the gear I play live. So I showed you my pedal board, the Helix. If you're interested in that, I will link it up somewhere right there probably. So if you're interested, you can go and watch that. The focus of the video today will be the creation of patches. Actually, when I create my patches or work on recordings, I don't use the hardware Helix at all, but I do it at my computer with the Line 6 Helix Native plugin. So my setup is like this. I'm sitting at my desk. That looks a little bit like this. I have the Focusrite Scarlett interface sitting right here, and I plug the guitar in right there, just via cable. I have the gain on the Focusrite matched to what would be the equivalent on my Helix. So when I load up a patch from my Helix in Helix Native, I will get the same kind of gain or input levels. So with that being said, let's have a look at my screen. So I'm using Ableton Live, and a typical project setup would be something like you see right now. I have a click track, I have the MP3, or I have backing tracks, kind of depends. Then I have a guitar track and also a MIDI track, which I will explain later how I use that. And on the guitar track, I have the Helix Native plugin sitting right here. I also have a EQ and compressor here that are switched off at the moment. I will explain later in the video what's up with that. And if I open up the Helix Native or Helix Native plugin, this is what it looks like. So in case you don't know this, you can actually buy basically the full functionality of the Line 6 Helix as a plugin, which comes in at, I believe it's $100 extra. And when I had the Helix in the first time, I was hesitant to pay that money. I actually didn't want to pay $100 extra just to have it as a software, but I finally did it, and I'm really glad I did it because it takes so much of the work off my shoulders. It makes this whole thing so much easier for me. So that was definitely worth the money. When I use the Helix or the Helix Native plugin, I generally use it similar like a pedal board. So I have one preset per song, but I don't have like a completely different rig on every preset, but they are quite similar. So I do basically copies of the same patch and adjust them for the song that I'm playing. So I will typically pick a preset that I like or that is near to what I always use. And then if needed, I tweak that to the specific song. And inside each song, I use snapshots for the different sections of the song to turn certain blocks on or off, or also change parameters. So what I've done right now is I've picked a preset that resembles very well what my typical preset would look like. And I will just show you around a bit. I will also explain what kind of things I like to switch around or change and what is pretty much always the same. So first of all, let's start with amps, since amps are really the most defining or sound shaping tool in your whole effects chain. What I do is I have a stereo setup where I have a split that splits full left-right. So it's a hard left, hard right pan. And on the left side, I have the Matchstick Channel 1 amp. That's a matchless model. And on the right side, I have the AC15 model. I'm using amp and cap blocks combined. So at the moment I'm not using IRs in these patches. First of all, because I want to make them downloadable for you, but also for myself, I just didn't have the time yet to have a deep look inside IRs. So For now, I just stick to the stock caps, but I definitely want to get started with IRs as well. I pretty much always leave them as is. The only thing I change basically is the drive, so the gain and the channel volume. So this with drive on 3.2 on both of them, that would be kind of a typical setting for me. So with everything switched off, that sounds like this. So that's at the point of breakup where I can play a little bit lighter and have a cleaner sound. But I can also dig in and get a bit overdrive. If I need a really clean sound, or if that's too much, there are certain songs like that. I will dial back the gain a bit to 2.0 or 2.4 or something like that. And then I will use the channel volume to make up for the loss in volume. Other than that, this amp setup is pretty much the same on all of my presets. It's kind of my core tone, and the general setup with a matchless and a Vox. That's pretty much the Hillsong setup. So if you know what Nigel from Hillsong has been playing a lot, that's pretty much it. I've tested that for myself and found that I really like it. I also have played the Vox AC15, the real one, myself for quite a while. So that's a sound that sits right with me. If you were going for more of a Bethel style, I believe they are using Vox and Fender combinations as amps. For me, this works really well. I also want to point out I'm using the AC15, not the AC30 on purpose. I feel like a lot of people, if they want that Vox sound, they just jump straight to the AC30 because that's bigger and louder and better. At least that's my impression. However, the AC30, in case you don't know it, it's not just a bigger version or a louder version or a more version of the AC15, but the AC15 actually has a little bit different characteristic, and I A/B tested them, and to me the AC15 just feels right. So that's what I'm using. Now let's quickly talk about compression. So I have a compressor sitting at the front of my signal chain. The specific type I'm using is the Deluxe Comp. The reason for that is that the Deluxe Comp gives me controls for ratio and threshold and something like that. So that would be the typical controls you would find on a studio compressor or compressor plugin for home recording, song production, a plugin, something like that. Other guitar compressors have controls like sustain or compression, and to me that's a little bit, I don't know, it's meaningless almost, because what does that mean, sustain? What does it do to my sound? If you're a beginner, you would say, yeah, it adds sustain, but if you know something about how compressors work, I don't get an accurate understanding from that, how the compressor will actually interact with my signal. So I like threshold, ratio, attack, these settings better, even though they are a bit more complicated. The way I use the compressor is pretty subtle. I've actually done a video about compression for worship guitar a while back. That's an older video. It's a bit awkward. I was not so experienced with video filming, but everything I say in this video, or almost everything, is still more or less how I view it today. So if you're interested in my views about worship guitar compression, you can go and watch that video. I will link it down below and also up here. What I do right here is I have the mix at 60% and I have a lighter ratio at 3:1. And if I just play a little bit softer at the gain reduction, you can see it's really taking only a tiny bit off, and if I dig in a bit more, it does do a little bit more, but not super heavy, and also it's only mixed in 60%. So the compressor is really just taking off the harsh edges, but not making a massive squeezy kind of compression. And I like that more because I can still have the dynamics of the amp, what I explained before. That kind of interaction with the point of breakup, I can still have that. The next point in my signal chain is overdrive. I'm almost always using the same combination of overdrives. I do switch them sometimes, but rarely. And this is kind of my go-to setup. So I have the Timmy or Tima in line 6 language, the Timmy block sitting right here. You could view that as a first stage overdrive. For me, it's almost an always on pedal. My default sound is not without the Timmy, but my default sound is with the Timmy. And if I want to go more softly or I feel I need to really cut back, then I switch off the Timmy. But I have it on 80% of the time, I would say, at least. So with the Timmy, it sounds like this. I have to say though that in a live situation I actually use the real Timmy pedal. So I have that sitting in the effects loop, and if I create a patch like this and drag it onto the real Helix using USB, I switch out that block for the FX loop block and have my real Timmy. But I use it in the same way and the settings are similar. So that's the first stage overdrive. On the second stage, I typically have the Tube Screamer or Scream 808 block. I switch that sometimes. For example, on my Phenomena video, I believe I had a fuzz. And on a video I'm working on right now, I use the Kinky Boost. But I like the Tube Screamer a lot. Typically, that's exactly the type of sound I need for lead guitars or bigger guitar parts. So I will stack that with the Timmy. And the Tube Screamer has this kind of mid boost that helps the lead lines really stick out. Sounds like this. A little bit dry, of course, without any reverb or delay. Let's switch on delay and reverb. So these two, the Tube Screamer and the Timmy, will be my overdrive blocks 90% of the time. And I use Snapshots mostly to toggle them on or off, or toggle them manually. So that brings me to the next point in my signal chain, which is delay. But before the signal hits delay, make sure you hit that like button. It helps out the channel a lot, lets me know that you enjoyed the content and that I should keep creating more of it. So when it comes to delay, I actually use the simple delay. I changed the parameters quite a lot for each song. So first of all, I will of course put in the BPM for the song and then set the time signature. So for this song, it's actually not on dotted. So let's put it, that was the wrong one. Let's put it on the typical dotted setting. So I'm using the simple delay here. I'm not super much into modulated delays or tape delays. I did use a vintage tape delay or something like that on a video I'm working on right now, but mostly I use just the simple delay. I like clean delays more because I like to kind of rhythmically work with the delay or almost anticipate the single delays and incorporate them in my playing. That's maybe a bit exaggerated, but these kind of modulated delays that are in the background, that's not so much my style. So what I have here is the simple delay. That's a clean digital delay. I will change the feedback depending on the song, the tempo of the song. I will set it so that I have around 3 to 4 repeats audible. Something like that. And the mix, if you set it at 50%, it makes the repeats exactly as loud as the actual signal. So I typically have it at 42, 40%, 45, something like that, so that the repeats are a little bit less loud than the actual signal. I actually have the scale wrong here. That's should be on 100%. So one other thing I change around with the delay is the placement in the signal chain. So right here I have it in front of the amp, and what that does basically is it makes the delays compared against the actual signal distorted. So if I play, you can kind of hear like the delay gets this dirty distortion, I would almost call it. If I put the delay after the amps, like this, you can hear it's a lot cleaner, but it's also more sterile before the amps. You can hear that dirty, fizzy overdrive. People sometimes feel when they use modelers that they tend to sound more sterile and almost a bit artificial, and the real amp with a pedal board in front just feels different. And one part in that can be that with a real amp, if you're not using effects loop in the amp, you will have your pedals in front of the amp, so the reverb and the delay will interact differently with an overdriven amp. So as a go-to setting, I like to have the delay before the amp, so I get that little bit of dirty overdrive. For some songs, that's not ideal. If I feel that it's disturbing or it's not fitting the song, I will move the delay past the amps. So the next thing in the signal chain would be the volume pedal. There's nothing really specific to talk about. I'm using the expression pedal on the real Helix when I'm live. And on the second function of the expression pedal, I have the mix control for delays. So I can control between 0 and something like 45% the mix setting. I also sometimes control mix or even feedback with snapshots if I need different delay settings for the sections of the song. The next thing in my signal chain is a modulation block that I typically have there. My default go-to setting is this Trinity chorus. I'm actually not a fan of having a whole lot of modulation going on, similar to like I'm not a fan of modulated reverbs. Somehow that's just not my style. I kind of like the raw guitar sound, if you will. However, I have the Trinity chorus and I have it at a super subtle setting, so the depth control for left and right, it's just at 1.1. And if I play like that, and if I need a stronger chorus, I will increase this depth to something around the 3 mark. So that would be something like this. But that's really the maximum that I'm having on this. And after that, I have my default reverb. I had switched it off until now. So let's switch off the delay for a second and just hear the reverb by itself. So as you can hear, it's a quite long reverb, but it's not super bright. So what I'm doing is I have the low cut at around 200 Hertz. So I'm cutting away all the low end from the reverb, all the bass heavy frequencies. And I'm also cutting quite a bit of high end. So if I would pull the high cut back up, it would sound a whole lot different. You can hear that reverb gets really bright. But I typically have it either at around 5K or even just 2.5K or something like that. And what that does is it lets the reverb sit behind what I actually play. So I have a long reverb trail that doesn't get in the way of my playing. I also use quite a lot of pre-delay, something around 40 milliseconds. And I changed the mix setting and the decay setting from song to song, like what I feel is right, and also the high cut. So I will play a little bit with these parameters, but I typically use this cave reverb. And I have a second reverb that I stack with the first reverb, and I use that for swirls. So if I would just use the second reverb for a second, that is the searchlights. You can hear that's actually quite long. And if I have the delay and the normal reverb on, like I typically would, and would just play a chord, this is what it sounds like. And if I would do swirls right now, I can just do it with the pot on the guitar. That's how I would do ambience type stuff. I also have a snapshot usually for that ambience that will switch that on or off. I do have one more block in the chain, and that is this parametric EQ. And all this does is at around 5 kilohertz, I have a little bump of 1.5 dB. And that actually brings me back to the plugins on my, let's close that for a second. The plugins I have on my channel in Ableton here. I've shown you before already that I have the EQ and Compressor plugin right here. And right here you can see that I also have a little bump, just 0.7 dB at around 5K. So the reason for that is that when I started doing my YouTube videos and I was editing my guitar tracks, I pulled up an EQ, and what you would typically do in editing is sweeping through frequencies. So you would take a band, something like this, and would sweep through it and kind of try to find frequencies that are annoying or that are bad for the overall signal, and then you would cut that out. And I was doing that, actually trying to find a frequency I don't like or see if there's any. And at around that 5K frequency, I thought, oh, that actually sounds pretty good. Kind of reminded me of Gretsch pickups for some reason. And something about that frequency felt right for me. So I started just doing a little 2 or 3 dB bump for my videos. And then I thought to myself, well, if I do that on my videos, I might also just incorporate it in my patches. But I found if I bump it up that much in my patches, it's actually a bit too much, especially for live use. So what I did is I pulled up an EQ and increased that frequency by a little bit less, so just 1.5 dB. And then, since for my videos I wanted to have a little bit more of that, I still have the EQ here with just that tiny little extra bump. So, I mean, if I wanted to highlight that frequency right now, I could bring up the gain. Let's just switch that off. Obviously that was a quite extreme example, just to show you what that frequency sounds like. And I also, for my videos, have a little compressor here. That's just very subtly taking the edge off. So if I play lightly, you can see the gain reduction in the middle. It basically does nothing, or almost nothing. And if I play a little bit harder, a lot of delay going on. But you can see the compressor really is interacting just a tiny bit with the signal. It's just like a little extra mastering for my videos, which already brings me to my video creation process. So you might notice I'm not actually using the real Helix right now. And also for my videos, I don't use it. So if I use Snapshots, how am I doing that? And the answer for that is in this MIDI track down below here. So what this is doing is it's triggering the snapshots for the Helix plugin. So the MIDI track is routed to the guitar channel and specifically the Helix Native plugin. And it just sends a little command to trigger snapshots. So that means when I'm preparing a song, I can just record the guitar lines and after that continue to tweak the sound in the Helix plugin, position the MIDI commands right where I need it, and then when I start to record a video, I can just play freely and the commands will trigger the right snapshots at the right time, and I don't have to do any tap dancing or stepping with my foot whatsoever. So that's really nice. Yeah, and then basically I export the patch I created, I upload it for you to be able to download it. I pull it onto my real Helix, which a lot of the time isn't even in my house. Right now it's sitting in the truck of the church, I believe. And I use pretty much the same patch live. I just exchanged the Timmy block for the real Timmy and make sure all my buttons are assigned correctly. Yes, and so that wraps up this video. I hope this was helpful information for you. Maybe you got some insight in how I create my patches. Maybe it's useful for you if you want to recreate sounds or experiment with sounds on the Pod Go or the HX Stomp or something like that. If this was helpful for you, if you liked the video, hit that like button. If you are interested in Helix patches, in covers, in any of these things, make sure to get subscribed. And I hope to see all of you in the next video. Bye!